What do you see as the role of International House in the language teaching world going forward?
I'm going to go back to start with, because for anyone who doesn't know how important International House was and has been for language teaching, they need to know that it was at International House that what is now a standard model of pre-service teacher training was, as it were, invented, specifically by John Haycraft and the people who worked with him when the school was first founded. Because his concern in those days was that a lot of people go into teaching with academic preparation, and the teaching of languages was often done by people who had academic preparation but not much practical nous about how to carry it out. And so a course was developed. First it was a 2-week course, then a 3-week course, then a 4-week course, and so on. A course was developed which would actually be practical in its focus rather than academic. Now, we could argue about that and the balance, but the revolutionary impact this had was that people who had no teaching experience would go along to these courses and spend 4 weeks worrying about how to stand, where to sit, what to do, how to introduce this, about the nuts and bolts of teaching, not necessarily about the academic side of what they were doing, but about the sheer physical person-to-person organisation of space and groups and pairs and classes and that kind of thing. And the result of this was that International House became known as a beacon of teacher training. Indeed, there's a generation of people in the field of English language teaching in particular who come out of that tradition and directly from International House, and who are still very much involved in English language teaching around the world. Has that position altered or changed? Well, in some ways the spread of courses amongst all sorts of institutions has taken the sole focus away from International House, because so many other people, this course, by the way, was then adopted and generalized so that it's now administered by an examinations board, the CELTA course, for example. But International House was the model and still is the model for that kind of training. And it has a reputation around the world for that kind of approach to teacher training. What about the future? Well, times are more competitive now than they were. Many people are able to offer training of teachers around the world. But International House, with its history and with the current expertise that resides within the school and within the organisation, has the power to influence teacher training in exactly the same way as it did then. So what my vision for International House is that it should be, and will and should be, experimenting, going forwards, trying out new ways of training, re-examining the whole issue of training teachers in exactly the same way that John Haycraft did in all those many, many years ago. My vision would exactly be to, as it were, go back to basics sometimes, to take time out and have a really big think about whether you would train teachers in the same way now as you do if you were to start all over again. What would it be like to start with a blank slate and then say, what can we do? Would it be any different? And I think International House is ideally placed for that kind of discussion, precisely because of the expertise that resides both within its present personnel, but also within its sort of history and its past and the very sort of fabric of the whole organisation.